beneath the ashes of the world's most violent century lie stories that were never meant to be unearthed. Not the victories written in textbooks or the speeches carved into monuments, but the shadows that slipped between official records. Convoys without names, bunkers sealed in silence, files stamped out of existence. These are the echoes of operations whispered in code and buried under false manifests, where ships vanish from the sea as if consumed by fog, and tunnels collapse before their maps can be drawn. They linger like faint signals on broken radios, fragments of truths that cannot find the surface. Imagine vaults of paper locked away not for decades, but for generations, their pages yellowing in the dark, while entire wars are remembered without them. To open such vaults is to enter a world where history is a weapon, and the sharpest blades are secrets so dangerous they were never meant to see light again. Chapter 1: The Ghost Convoys of Murmansk. The story of the so-called ghost convoys to Murmansk remains one of the least discussed operations of the Second World War, preserved only in scattered fragments of declassified files, survivor testimony, and Soviet intercepts. Between the spring of 1942 and the summer of 1944, dozens of Allied merchantmen supposedly crossed the Arctic routes from Britain to the northern Soviet Union, laden with cargo so sensitive it was stripped from official ledgers. In Admiralty records, Convoy PQ-17 and its successors are well documented, with losses carefully tabulated. Yet among the escort logs of HMS Onslow, HMS Faulkner, and the American destroyer USS Mayrant appear fleeting references to Convoy KX, Convoy White, and Special Murmansk tonnage, names that appear nowhere in formal archives. The surviving signals are stamped with the highest grade of classification and marked Admiralty Eyes Only. When later historians accessed the Public Record Office in Kew in the 1970s, they found that entire folders were missing, replaced with placeholders indicating transferred to other custody. The blank pages themselves suggest a deliberate attempt to erase. The origins of the mystery may lie in Whitehall's desperation to keep Stalin supplied while also securing influence over the post-war order. The Soviets demanded material on an unprecedented scale. Tanks, trucks, aircraft, raw aluminum, and especially radar technology. Conventional convoys carried this openly. But several signals from 1942 suggest that experimental cargo, including sealed drums labeled HW, shorthand for heavy water, was also loaded aboard. Surviving crew accounts from the merchant vessel SS Empire Elgar describe armed guards from the special branch who never left the deck, traveling with cases they refused to label on the manifest. In his 1961 interview with the BBC, one surviving steward mentioned crates stenciled with strange symbols and Norwegian writing. When pressed, he admitted he believed they contained captured German nuclear materials seized after the sabotage operations in Vemork. Evidence from the Soviet side only deepens the enigma. Intercepts by the NKVD, discovered in Moscow after the fall of the USSR, describe frustration that vessels identified on radio never reached Murmansk harbor. Reports speak of convoys that approached the Kola Inlet, but were never logged entering port. The wording suggests that either the ships were diverted elsewhere, or their cargo was secretly transferred before docking. A cable dated 12th September 1943 from NKVD General Fetin notes, Western shipments invisible in port, yet signals prove their presence. Unclear disposition. Possible Anglo-American concealment. That sentence is the only surviving reference to these convoys in Soviet files, and it raises the suspicion that Stalin himself was being deceived. What happened to the missing ships remains unclear. No wreckage has been positively identified despite extensive post-war sonar sweeps of the Barents Sea and Norwegian coastal waters. The official tonnage lists omit their losses, yet certain dockyard records show repair work on escorts with unexplained damage, consistent with heavy weather action. Former Royal Navy officer Lieutenant Gerald Phipps, writing privately in 1982, recalled a destroyer under his division returning to Scapa Flow with hull damage from collision during convoy KX-3. Though no convoy of that designation exists in Admiralty lists, the name KX-3 appears only in that account and in a redacted page from the Naval Diary of Vice Admiral Bonham Carter. Both references were suppressed until Freedom of Information requests released them. Speculation has run in several directions. One theory argues the convoys were used to ferry German prisoners of high value, exchanged quietly with Moscow for captured Allied officers. Supporting this are hints in War Office personnel records showing sudden reappearances of British captains listed as missing in action on the Eastern Front, without explanation of their return. Another theory centers on nuclear cooperation. Documents in the US National Archives reveal cables from General Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, complaining in July 1943 of uncoordinated transfers of sensitive material to foreign custody via Arctic. The phrase has long been interpreted as frustration with the British, who may have attempted to barter captured heavy water and uranium ore with Stalin to secure leverage over Poland or the Baltic states. If true, such dealings would explain the determination to erase the convoys from history. Seamen who survived speak of the operations with unease. William Hargreaves, a radio operator aboard HMS Middleton, recalled in a 1974 interview that entire frequencies were silenced under orders marked Silence Priority 1. He said, "We knew PQ-17, we knew QP-14, but this had no name. We escorted merchantmen with no running lights, no log entries, and when we docked, we were told not to speak of it again. It was as though those ships never existed." His testimony is corroborated by partial ship's logs, where convoy designations are simply crossed out, leaving only the date and position. The systematic redaction suggests direction from high levels of command. The fate of the missing cargo has fueled decades of speculation. In 1957, US Navy divers operating in the Barents Sea reported detecting a steel anomaly beneath 300 feet of water. When they returned to the site weeks later, they found the seabed disturbed as though salvage operations had taken place. Official reports dismiss this as geological movement, but internal memos between the Admiralty and the CIA reference possible recovery by unauthorized trawlers. Whether those trawlers were Soviet or private remains unknown. A later note from the CIA in 1968 suggested that Soviet nuclear scientists had acquired foreign heavy water of non-Scandinavian origin, possibly from a lost Allied shipment. This statement was buried in the annex of an intelligence. Estimates never made public until 2004. The ghost convoys highlight the murky interplay between wartime necessity and post-war secrecy. The very existence of unacknowledged supply runs undermines the accepted narrative of Allied unity. It suggests a layer of clandestine bargaining where technology, prisoners, and influence were traded behind the cover of missing tonnage sheets. The archival silences are louder than the documents themselves. Files marked transferred sit in the catalogues of Kew and Washington, their destinations never revealed. Survivors continue to die without giving full accounts, some bound by oaths of secrecy that have never expired. And at the bottom of the Barents, in waters swept by ice and storm, sonar still picks up the occasional shadow of steel hulls not listed on any naval register. Whether they carried radar prototypes, uranium, or men whose names were erased, the ghost convoys remain locked between history and myth, preserved only in fragments that escaped the shredder. What can be said with certainty is that something was hidden on those Arctic routes, something deemed too dangerous for the world to know. Until the day those erased files surface, the convoys to Murmansk will haunt the grey seas of history as ships without names, recorded only by those who swore never to speak of them. Chapter 2. Operation Eclipse's Vanished Luftwaffe Files. The last weeks of the war in Europe were marked by chaos, but amid the collapse of the Third Reich, Allied intelligence operations focused obsessively on one target: the Luftwaffe's research archives. Operation Eclipse, the codename for the rapid seizure of German command centers and Air Force facilities, was launched in late April 1945. Its stated purpose was to prevent organized resistance and to capture key personnel. But behind that objective lay another mission, unspoken and deeply classified: the hunt for experimental aircraft designs and the technical records that supported them. British Executive Corps, advancing into Bavaria, reported seizing underground vaults near Oberammergau containing thousands of Luftwaffe files, ranging from jet propulsion studies to long-range bomber specifications. Within days, those documents vanished into Anglo-American custody, with the record trail ending in a single chilling word stamped on surviving reports: transferred. The story begins in Augsburg, where US forces captured the Messerschmitt Design Bureau in late April. Engineers described projects far beyond what had reached production: twin fuselage jet bombers, supersonic prototypes, and flight records indicating test ranges to 6,000 miles. When RAF intelligence officers reviewed the material, They noted proposals for an America bomber, a strategic platform designed to carry ordnance across the Atlantic to strike New York. These findings were entered into the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee (CIOS) reports, but entire sections were later removed before publication. Researchers who studied the edited reports decades later noticed gaps in numbering. Entire annexes replaced with "document not available." More troubling are the traces left behind in private papers. Air Commodore Eric Brown, one of the RAF's most experienced test pilots, wrote in his diary of May 1945 that he was briefed on long-range intercontinental jet proposals during the Eclipse seizures. In a later memoir, he referred obliquely to designs that exceeded the capabilities of our own 1950s projects. Yet no official Eclipse file mentions such discoveries. Declassified American Air Technical Intelligence reports reference Luftwaffe prototypes labeled P1101, P1107, and P1112, but surviving diagrams cut off abruptly after initial sketches. It is as if the detailed blueprints were lifted out of history, spirited away into black projects. Witnesses from the ground confirm that something extraordinary was taken. Sergeant William Ashcroft, attached to a British intelligence unit, recalled in a 1978 interview that sealed containers were removed from a mountain bunker near Oberammergau, loaded directly onto US trucks, and escorted by military police. He described entire archives on microfilm reels, carefully packed in steel cases. When his unit asked for access, they were told the material had been transferred to higher authority. No follow-up orders ever came, and the records were never seen again. His testimony was later corroborated by a surviving inventory slip recovered in the National Archives in Kew, which listed 52 reels, Luftwaffe development files, America bomber, crossed out in red pencil. Operation Paperclip complicates the story further. Dozens of Luftwaffe engineers were quietly transported to the United States, officially to assist in aeronautical research. Among them were men like Werner von Braun, whose rocketry work is well known. Yet less publicized were figures like Dr. Hans Wocker, designer of the Junkers Ju 287 forward-swept bomber, and Dr. Heinrich Hertel of Heinkel. Several were recorded as having worked on advanced propulsion and high-altitude systems. American interrogation reports of these men remain heavily censored, with entire sections blacked out. When archivists pressed for release, the US Air Force replied that the files were integral to current defense projects. The implication is clear. Concepts seized during Operation Eclipse did not disappear. They were assimilated. What lends this theory weight are the shadows in post-war aviation history. The sudden leap in American bomber design between 1945 and 1948, from piston-driven B-29s to the jet-powered B-47 Stratojet, has long raised questions. Boeing engineers publicly admitted they studied German swept-wing data, but never explained the source of certain wind tunnel results. Similarly, the Convair B-58 Hustler, designed in the 1950s, bore uncanny resemblance to German delta-wing concepts found in Messerschmitt's archives. Official histories downplay this, but fragments of correspondence between British and American officers reveal tension. One 1946 letter from Air Ministry, liaison officer Sir Thomas Pike to General Karl Spaatz complained of material seized under Eclipse and withheld from British review. His words hint at a struggle over custody of Luftwaffe secrets. The Soviets too sensed deception. NKVD intelligence reports from June 1945 note that Anglo-American seizures exceed disclosed inventories, with particular concern over long-range jet bomber studies. Soviet engineers attempted to replicate captured German designs, but without access to full archives, their results lagged behind. This fueled decades of suspicion, contributing to the Cold War's early arms race. The USSR's Tu-95 bomber program, though ultimately successful, began with stolen fragments, while the West advanced rapidly with fuller knowledge. Why the files remain hidden is a question without easy answers. One possibility is that they were suppressed to conceal the scale of German technological progress at the end of the war. Public acknowledgement that the Luftwaffe had designs capable of striking the United States could have destabilized Allied morale in the fragile post-war climate. Another possibility is that the material fed directly into classified aerospace programs, whose lineage the West preferred not to acknowledge. Even in the 1980s, researchers attempting to access Eclipse files found themselves blocked. Historian R.V. Jones, who had overseen wartime scientific intelligence, admitted in private correspondence that not all of Eclipse has seen daylight. nor will it. The phrase "not for release until 2099" appears in scattered catalogue entries for captured German documents held by US repositories. The century-long seal is unusual, suggesting extreme sensitivity. Researchers have speculated that the hidden files may include not only technical designs, but also details of covert negotiations with German officers, offers of surrender in exchange for immunity, or intelligence on war crimes linked to aviation experiments. The erasure may serve multiple purposes: protecting reputations, concealing the origins of Cold War advances, and avoiding difficult truths about collaboration. Today, the vanished Luftwaffe files of Operation Eclipse remain one of the great silences of the war. Officially, the seizure was a success, with vital documents secured. Yet the record is fragmented, the catalogues riddled with gaps, the surviving testimonies hushed or contradicted. What is certain is that something of immense significance was found in those Bavarian bunkers and swiftly removed from the historical record, whether it was the blueprint of an intercontinental bomber, the seed of Cold War aerospace supremacy, or evidence of deals struck in the shadows. The truth has been buried under layers of classification. Until the seals are lifted, all that remains are the hints, the redacted reports, the missing annexes, the survivors who whisper of microfilm reels locked in steel cases. Operation Eclipse achieved its objective, but what it uncovered has been hidden from the world for more than 70 years and may remain hidden for generations to come. Chapter 3. The Silent Bunkers of Okinawa. The Battle of Okinawa, fought between April and June 1945, was the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War, a prelude to the invasion of Japan itself. American reports described endless Japanese fortifications, caves, tunnels, and pillboxes carved into limestone ridges. Yet, in the confusion of the battle, not all fortifications were mapped, and not all were properly recorded when US engineers sealed them after the fighting. What has emerged in scattered declassified reports is the suggestion that beneath Okinawa lay a network of bunkers larger and deeper than any acknowledged by post-war histories, filled with materials and equipment that should not have been there. The surviving evidence, faint and deliberately suppressed, tells a story of vanished entrances, sealed maps, and technical finds inconsistent with Japanese industry of the time. The first hint appeared in June 1945, when the US 10th Army submitted a report cataloguing captured Japanese defenses. In addition to over 1,500 caves and tunnels, one entry noted extensive underground system, believed German assisted, depth unknown. The site was listed near Shuri Ridge but marked denied access. Within weeks, the line was struck from the official copy of the report. Surviving copies in the US National Archives show a black line where the entry once was. Veterans recall being told that certain tunnel systems were to be sealed without survey. Corporal Daniel Ward, a combat engineer attached to the 96th Infantry Division, later testified that his unit poured cement into shafts far deeper than any we'd seen, under orders marked permanent denial. Ward claimed that the tunnels contained crates stenciled with German lettering, including the words Daimler-Benz Flugmotoren. Japanese civilians also whispered of underground trains beneath the southern hills. Oral histories collected in the 1960s tell of engines heard running at night, long after the battle had moved north. Survivors described forced labor in caverns where rails were laid, and machinery was lowered through vertical shafts. These accounts align with fragmentary maps found among Imperial Japanese Navy files, showing tunnel grids extending hundreds of meters underground, with unexplained chambers marked with a single kanji character: secret. Such maps were excluded from the final Allied translation projects, and their originals disappeared. What makes the case more disturbing are the records of captured equipment. In September 1945, a US Navy technical team inspected several sealed sites on Okinawa. Their unpublished notes, later rediscovered by historian Robert Stinnett, describe radio sets of advanced design, unlike Japanese manufacture. The report mentions frequency hopping capability, a technology decades ahead of its time. Alongside this were partially assembled airframes bearing no resemblance to Zero fighters or Japanese bombers. One officer sketched a wing with a jet intake, annotated, design unknown. These sketches were filed under miscellaneous equipment and never circulated publicly. The original report was stamped withhold from publication, Joint Chiefs, and remained hidden until partial declassification in the 1980s. The presence of German technology on Okinawa is not entirely implausible. Axis cooperation extended farther than many historians admit. U-boats such as U-234 were documented carrying advanced equipment and personnel to Japan, including uranium oxide and jet parts. U-234 surrendered in May 1945 en route to Japan, but others may have reached their destination. Signals intelligence shows several submarines departing Europe late in the war that never resurfaced in records. If even one reached Okinawa before the American invasion, it could explain the anomalous finds. Yet official histories deny the possibility, emphasizing Japan's collapsing infrastructure. The discovery of Daimler-Benz components in Okinawa tunnels suggests otherwise. The suppression of the bunkers appears deliberate. When veterans returned in the 1950s and 1960s, they found many cave entrances sealed with reinforced concrete poured by US Army engineers. Requests for excavation were denied on grounds of safety. Researchers attempting to match wartime maps with modern terrain discovered discrepancies. Entire valleys where tunnel systems were logged no longer show any access points. One military geologist, Dr. Harold Jensen, reported in 1972 that magnetic surveys detected hollow voids beneath closed sites, yet his report was buried in Army archives. Jensen himself wrote, "The Okinawa subsurface anomalies align with known tunnel locations, but access has been systematically obliterated." Prisoner testimony adds a darker dimension. Several captured Japanese officers, interrogated at Camp Tracy in California, referred obliquely to transfer operations conducted from Okinawa in 1944. One transcript quotes a naval officer saying, "We received German boxes by submarine. Orders were to move them inland, never to Tokyo." Another spoke of foreign specialists who vanished after the battle. The interrogations were classified and later shredded, but surviving index cards prove they existed. Whether these specialists were German scientists or technicians remains unknown, but their presence would explain the foreign equipment described in sealed bunkers. The fate of the tunnels has never been fully investigated. In 1946, US Army Corps of Engineers maps show areas denied, sealed for safety, with no further detail. Civilian researchers attempting excavation in the 1960s were blocked by the Japanese government, citing unexploded ordnance. Even today, large sections of southern Okinawa remain closed to digging. Rumors persist of US military involvement. Veterans of the Korean War recall being stationed at Okinawa bases and hearing stories of black tunnels beneath the hills, off limits to all personnel. Some claim to have seen guarded entrances, marked by fences and armed MPs as late as 1952. The question remains, why were the bunkers sealed so thoroughly, and why was the record scrubbed? Theories abound. One possibility is that the tunnels contained evidence of Axis cooperation that would have embarrassed the Allies, proving that German technology had reached the Pacific theater. Another is that the materials related to atomic research. The crates with heavy water symbols, mentioned in one oral account, suggest that nuclear experimentation could have been underway on Okinawa, far from the reach of American bombers. A third theory is more sinister, that the tunnels housed human experiments, evidence of war crimes the Allies preferred, buried. The disappearance of Japanese prisoners connected to the bunkers lends credence to this. War crimes tribunals focused on camps in China, but if Okinawa held similar facilities, exposing them might have complicated occupation politics. Even now, Okinawa's hills conceal their secrets. Modern satellite imagery shows irregularities consistent with collapsed voids beneath certain ridges, but without excavation, nothing can be proven. Local legends persist, of machinery still entombed, of sealed rails and ghost trains. Survivors of the battle speak of echoes underground, the sense of vast empty spaces beneath their feet, and in archives in Washington and Tokyo, files marked permanent denial sit unreleased, their contents redacted or destroyed. The silent bunkers of Okinawa remain just that, silent, closed off by concrete and by history, a shadow beneath the blood-soaked ground of the Pacific War's final battle. What lies beneath may never be unearthed, but the fragments we possess, German serial numbers, vanished maps, missing prisoners, are enough to suggest that what was hidden there could have rewritten the understanding of Axis cooperation, and perhaps the very course of the Cold War that followed. Chapter 4. The Vatican's Hidden War Archives. In the spring of 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed, German officials fled southward with convoys of documents, gold, and artifacts. Many were intercepted by Allied troops along the Brenner Pass, but some convoys slipped through into neutral or semi-neutral territory. Italian partisans reported seeing SS trucks bearing Reich insignia roll toward Rome under heavy guard. Within weeks, rumors began to circulate that sealed crates were delivered under papal safe conduct into Vatican warehouses, where they vanished from sight. For decades, the Vatican denied possessing wartime German archives, yet scattered references in Allied files and Red Cross correspondence suggest otherwise. The story of these hidden archives remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the war's aftermath, bound up with politics, morality, and secrecy. The earliest official trace appears in a British intelligence summary dated May 1945, which mentions Axis couriers proceeding to Vatican City with sealed documents. The report notes that requests to intercept the convoy were denied for political considerations. American records echo the same frustration. OSS field agents complained that Vatican gates were closed to surveillance, and couriers were allowed in without inspection. Inside, it is believed the couriers delivered crates from Reich ministries, including the SS main office. What those crates contained is unknown, but scattered notes hint at financial records, coded communications, and technical research too valuable to destroy. The Red Cross provides a second thread. In Geneva, archives contain correspondence between Vatican officials and SS representatives dated late April 1945. These letters, preserved only in partial carbon copies, discuss custody of certain materials for safekeeping. One letter mentions technical custody, a phrase unusual for humanitarian work. Historians who reviewed the correspondence in the 1990s concluded that the phrase likely referred to non-financial items, perhaps scientific papers, uranium shipments, or advanced weapon designs. The Red Cross attempted to distance itself, insisting it had no role, but the letters bear the Vatican seal. The Vatican itself has long refused full transparency. In the 1960s, researchers seeking access to wartime archives were informed that the relevant sections remained sealed for reasons of sensitivity. Even when Pope Paul VI opened partial records in 1965, covering the Holocaust and papal diplomacy, nothing emerged regarding Axis deliveries. Yet rumors persisted, fed by testimonies from Italian clergy. Father Luigi Cavalli, a parish priest near Rome, wrote in his diary of May 1945 that he had seen SS trucks unload heavy chests at the gates of the Apostolic Palace at night. He described armed men, German and Italian, and papal officials receiving them. His diary remained private until his death in 1971, when his family donated it to a university archive. Historians who examined it judged the account credible. The involvement of Vatican warehouses is supported by Allied aerial reconnaissance. Photographs from June 1945 show unusual activity in the Cortile di San Damaso, the Vatican's inner courtyard. Trucks are visible, and temporary scaffolding appears along the walls. Officially, this was explained as construction, yet American intelligence annotated the photographs with the phrase probable unloading. What was being moved has never been explained. Speculation about the contents of the hidden archive centers on three areas. First, financial assets. Reichsbank gold, much of it looted from occupied Europe, could have been transferred into church custody as bargaining chips. Second, intelligence files. The SS maintained extensive records of collaboration, covert operations, and contacts with foreign officials, including in Spain, Switzerland, and South America. If delivered to the Vatican, such files would have been politically explosive, implicating figures across Europe. Third, technical research. Captured documents may have included studies on advanced weapons or nuclear material. One declassified US cable from 1946 mentions concern that Vatican may hold German uranium notes. The phrase appears in isolation, without elaboration, but it suggests Washington believed the possibility real. The Cold War only deepened the secrecy. In the late 1940s, US and British intelligence sought Vatican cooperation against Soviet expansion. Pressing the Church on its wartime role would have jeopardized that alliance. As a result, requests for access were quietly withdrawn. A CIA memorandum from 1952 states bluntly, "No further inquiries to be made into Vatican custody of Axis documents. Political cost exceeds intelligence value." This effectively sealed the matter, leaving the alleged archives untouched. Occasionally, fragments surface. In 1975, Italian police investigating Nazi gold shipments uncovered a reference to Depositi Vaticani, Vatican deposits. The file was abruptly closed. In 1999, a German historian researching in the Vatican library discovered a mislabeled folder containing Reich correspondence. Within were 3 letters signed by SS officers, one listing inventories of scientific crates destined for Rome. When he requested access to the related files, he was denied and asked to return the folder. No explanation was given. The moral implications are profound. If the Vatican did receive Axis materials, its role in concealing them casts a shadow over post-war justice. War crimes trials focused on Nuremberg and Tokyo, but evidence of broader complicity may lie sealed in Rome. Survivors of the Holocaust and their families have long pressed the Church for transparency, arguing that financial and logistical records could reveal the fate of looted assets. Historians, too, argue that technical documents might explain gaps in Allied accounts of German superweapon research. Yet the doors remain closed. The Vatican maintains its archives with a secrecy unmatched in Europe. Files are released only after set periods, and even then selectively. Many wartime collections remain inaccessible, categorized as special military. Requests from international commissions have been politely refused. The official explanation is that the archives are incomplete and disorganized. But for those who believe the Reich's convoys delivered more than paper, the refusal is evidence of concealment. Today, the Vatican's hidden war archives remain an unresolved chapter in the history of World War II. Between testimonies of priests, aerial photographs, Red Cross correspondence, and intelligence memos, the evidence points to at least some transfer of Nazi materials into church custody. What became of those crates is unknown. They may have been destroyed, buried in the vaults, or quietly returned, yet the secrecy persists. In the stone halls of Rome, behind locked doors and sealed files, may rest records that could alter our understanding of wartime diplomacy, Axis survival strategies, and the bargain struck in the ruins of 1945. Until access is granted, the story remains locked away, a silence preserved by one of the oldest institutions in Europe, guarding secrets delivered in the darkest hours of the war. Chapter 5. Project Iceworm's Forgotten Predecessor. In 1960, the United States Army unveiled Project Iceworm, an ambitious plan to bury nuclear missiles beneath Greenland's ice cap. Officially, the project was presented as a daring Cold War experiment that proved unfeasible when the ice proved unstable. The public story ended with Camp Century, a research station abandoned in 1967. Yet declassified fragments and Danish intelligence files point to a predecessor operation, begun not in the 1960s but immediately after World War II, in 1946. Its code name has been lost, but references to Camp Polaris appear in scattered US Army engineering records, buried under innocuous titles. What little is known suggests that the Arctic tunnels of Iceworm were not the first of their kind, and that the earlier project drew on technology and expertise taken from Germany under the cloak of Operation Paperclip. The earliest mention surfaces in a Danish Defense Intelligence Service memorandum dated 12 March 1958, which notes, prior installations in Greenland predate Iceworm. Camp Polaris, US Army Arctic Command, established 1946, location unconfirmed. Danish officials expressed alarm, as no such base had been disclosed under the 1951 US-Denmark Defense Agreement. The memo cites credible sources, claiming Polaris was a prototype missile storage facility, constructed with assistance from foreign technical advisors. In the context of the post-war years, this phrase can only refer to German specialists secretly brought to America. At the time, Washington maintained the fiction that paperclip scientists were limited to rocketry and aviation. Yet the evidence suggests some were diverted to Arctic engineering, designing subterranean facilities meant to conceal weapons in the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. American records, where they exist, are fragmentary. A 1947 Corps of Engineers report on Arctic construction refers to previous field tests, Greenland sector, but the annex containing site details has been removed. In the Army's construction archives, an entry for Project Polaris, log removed 1952, stands in place of documentation. A single surviving page lists sealed cargo, origin Bremen, delivered to Thule Harbor in September 1946. Bremen at the time was a port heavily involved in transporting captured German materiel. The fact that sealed cargo was shipped directly to Greenland raises immediate questions. What was so valuable and why Greenland? Veteran testimony provides further shadows. In 1973, retired engineer Captain Harold Kessler gave an oral history interview in which he recalled working briefly at an ice camp predating Century. He described tunnels cut into the ice, reinforced with timber and steel, housing long crates the size of fuselages. When asked about their contents, Kessler replied, "We weren't told, but the guards were MPs, not engineers, and they checked every movement." His comments were not widely published until decades later, but they align with the Danish intelligence memo. Kessler died in 1976, leaving only the fragmentary interview as evidence. Satellite imagery lends another clue. In the 1980s, analysts using classified US reconnaissance satellites noted collapsed ice caverns approximately 120 kilometers east of Thule. The report, declassified in part in 2002, describes subsurface voids consistent with man-made excavation. The voids were estimated to be at least 40 meters deep, with surface disturbances dating back to the late 1940s. Official explanations dismissed them as natural melt phenomena, but the language of the analysis, consistent with excavation, betrays doubt. If the site was Camp Polaris, its tunnels had long since collapsed, burying whatever lay inside. The German connection cannot be ignored. Paperclip records show that several engineers from the organization TOT and German U-boat facilities were relocated to obscure postings in 1946-47. Their names, Karl Richter, a specialist in underground bunkers, and Dr. Otto Reuter, an expert in Arctic logistics, appear in manifests with destinations listed only as Special Projects, US Army. These men vanish from the public paperclip rosters, yet correspondence between Army intelligence officers references Richter and Reuter, Greenland tests. The suspicion is clear. Polaris may have been constructed with knowledge derived directly from the massive underground facilities at Nordhausen and Peenemünde, where the V-weapons program had been housed. Why Greenland? Beyond its remoteness, Greenland was geopolitically ideal. It lay halfway between the United States and the Soviet Union, perfectly placed for intercontinental missile deployment. If Washington was already planning a nuclear posture in the Arctic as early as 1946, then Iceworm was not an isolated Cold War scheme, but the continuation of a classified program begun in the immediate aftermath of World War II. The fact that the site was erased from records suggests that the operation either failed catastrophically or uncovered technologies too sensitive to admit. Publicly, there are hints of both. A Danish diplomatic cable from 1951 refers to disturbances at a US Arctic installation, including toxic leakage. Greenlandic locals told stories of illness in nearby villages following American construction. Some spoke of barrels offloaded from ships, marked with warning symbols they did not recognize. If these barrels contain nuclear materials, uranium oxide for example, it would indicate the presence of a clandestine nuclear storage or testing program. Given that U-234, a German submarine, had been captured with uranium on board in May 1945, it is conceivable that some of that material was diverted not to Oak Ridge, but to hidden sites like Polaris. The most damning evidence lies in a 1962 CIA memorandum discovered by accident in the 1990s. The memo, titled Greenland Facilities, Historical Context, contains the line, "Project Iceworm was not the first of its type. Previous tunneling operations, Polaris, demonstrated feasibility but were compromised by ice movement." The sentence was later redacted from released versions, but the original page was photographed by researchers before being withdrawn. This admission confirms what scattered fragments had long suggested. Camp Polaris existed, and it was deliberately erased from official memory. Why then does the story remain buried? Part of the reason is diplomatic. Denmark, though formally allied with the US, was never informed of the full extent of American activities in Greenland. Admitting that a secret base was constructed in 1946 without consent would have triggered scandal. Another reason is technological. If Polaris truly involved German expertise, it would expose the degree to which Allied post-war programs depended on enemy science, undermining the narrative of independent progress. And finally, the nuclear dimension cannot be ignored. If uranium or other hazardous materials were stored under the ice, their discovery today would raise questions of contamination and treaty violations. As of now, Camp Polaris remains absent from official maps, its tunnels collapsed, its records shredded or sealed. Yet the clues align too closely to dismiss. From sealed cargo in Bremen to satellite voids east of Thule, from German engineers redirected to special projects, to the CIA's own acknowledgement, the existence of a forgotten Iceworm predecessor seems undeniable. The silence is not accidental. It is the silence of erasure, of a program deemed too dangerous for history. Somewhere beneath Greenland's endless ice, entombed in frozen caverns, may lie the remnants of America's first hidden nuclear frontier, conceived in the immediate aftermath of World War II and buried before the Cold War had even begun. The silence that surrounds these shadows is not empty, it is deliberate. What is buried beneath archives, behind locked doors, and under frozen ground still waits, suspended like a whisper trapped in ice. The question is not whether the truth exists, it is whether it can ever be spoken without unraveling the stories built in its absence. We walk among monuments and memorials while fragments of another history lie sealed in vaults, beneath concrete, inside forgotten reels of microfilm. Perhaps some truths are guarded not for our protection, but for control. Reminders that power is not always won on battlefields, but in the unseen corridors where erasure is more enduring than memory. And when silence itself becomes the final archive, what lingers is not certainty, but a haunting sense that the war never fully ended. It only retreated into shadows too deep for the living to follow.